He once defined romance on screen. Now he's redefining peace off it. When Richard Gere walked onto that morning show set, nobody expected what came next. No scandal, no gossip, no viral headline waiting to happen. Just a calm presence. The kind of quiet that instantly shifts a room. You could see it in the hosts' faces. They weren't just interviewing an actor. They were witnessing something different. Something rare in a world that never stops. Shouting. There he was. The man who once made audiences swoon in. Pretty woman and an officer and a gentleman. Sitting under bright studio lights. Not to talk about a blockbuster, but about a way of being. About peace, compassion, and something that sounds almost foreign in our time. Happiness that isn't for sale. As cameras rolled, his voice carried the same softness that once melted hearts. But now it carried something heavier. Truth. The kind that comes from decades of silence, reflection, and standing at the edge of both fame and faith. Viewers tuning in expected a light segment. Maybe a story about movie sets or celebrity friendships. But what they got was a conversation that felt like an intervention for the soul. A moment that asked, what if everything we've been chasing isn't what we truly need? And that's where it began. The story of a Hollywood legend who walked away from the noise to remind the world how to listen. Again, the film is called Wisdom of Happiness, and it's not what Hollywood expected from Richard Gere. No red carpets, no dramatic soundtrack, no glossy close-ups of fame. Instead, it's a quiet masterpiece, part biography, part spiritual reflection, and completely unlike anything in his long career. At its heart, the film celebrates the 90th year of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. But it's not a simple documentary. It's more like a living conversation between two old friends. One behind the camera, the other guiding the world through compassion. Gere calls it a hybrid, a meditation wrapped inside a story. The footage alone is breathtaking. Fragments of the Dalai Lama's early life, grainy black and white moments from the 1930s and 40s, his childhood laughter echoing through time. Then the darker chapters, the exile after the Chinese invasion, the escape in 1959, the path toward spiritual refuge. Every frame feels sacred, as if history itself is pausing to listen. But what makes Wisdom of Happiness so intimate is the way it's filmed. Instead of the usual documentary interviews, the camera meets the Dalai Lama's gaze directly. It's a mirror lens technique that makes it feel like he's looking straight into you. Not performing, not preaching, just being. Gere said it felt like having a private audience with him. One where the distance between teacher and viewer simply disappears. And here's what's fascinating. Richard Gere didn't jump into the project right away. For years, he'd been skeptical of films made about His Holiness. Too many, he said, were well-intentioned but shallow, crafted by people who didn't truly understand the depth of his message. But this time was different. The filmmakers, Swiss artists who had followed the Dalai Lama for decades, brought him footage so authentic, so deeply human, that Gere felt he had to be part of it. When he saw the raw clips, that unfiltered gaze, that laughter, that serenity amid chaos, he realized this wasn't just another documentary. It was an invitation, a chance to remind a fractured world what connection actually feels like. Because in a time when anger trends faster than truth, Wisdom of Happiness is the kind of film that dares to slow us down. It doesn't preach, it whispers. And somehow, in that whisper, it tells us everything we've forgotten about being human. To understand this film, you need to understand the friendship behind it. Because long before Richard Gere became the Hollywood icon we know today, he met a man who would quietly change everything about how he saw the world and how he chose to live in it. That man was His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Their connection began more than 45 years ago, not in a temple or on a film set, but in a quiet room where Gere, then a young actor still searching for meaning beyond fame, came face to face with compassion in human form. It wasn't some mystical moment or headline encounter. It was simple, calm, disarming, and it left a mark that would last a lifetime. From that day on, Gere's life began to split into two worlds. On one side, The glimmer of red carpets, tuxedos, the flash of cameras, the applause that never really feels like peace. And on the other, the stillness of Tibetan monasteries, the hum of prayer wheels, and the unmistakable sound of silence that teaches you to listen. In interviews, Gere often says the Dalai Lama didn't just influence his beliefs, he rewired his understanding of purpose. The lessons weren't philosophical, they were practical. Compassion wasn't an idea, it was a discipline, a way of showing up in a world that profits from noise and rewards ego. And over the years, that relationship grew into a kind of mentorship that defied distance. While most of Hollywood chased fame, Gere chose to chase understanding. He became one of the most visible Western advocates for Tibet, standing up to political pressure, speaking out even when it risked his career in China. It was more than activism, it was loyalty. You can see it in how he speaks, how he moves, how he pauses between words. That calm, unhurried energy that television hosts always mention. It isn't performance, it's practice. It's the residue of years spent learning how to be still in a world that never stops moving. And maybe that's the real story behind Wisdom of Happiness. It's not just about one man's film, it's about another man's lifelong lesson. A friendship that turned an actor into a student, and a celebrity into something even rarer in Hollywood. A man at peace with himself. The first thing you notice when you watch Wisdom of Happiness is his eyes. The Dalai Lama isn't just speaking to the camera, he's speaking through it. There's a quiet technique behind that power. The filmmakers used a mirrored lens, a simple but genius setup that lets him look directly into the eyes of the person interviewing him, and into yours. No distance, no barrier, just presence. It feels less like watching a documentary and more like sitting beside him in a sunlit room, hearing him breathe between words, feeling the small pauses where truth lives. Gere described it perfectly. It's like having a private audience with him. And somehow, through that camera, he manages to make every viewer feel seen. Not as an audience, but as a soul. Across Europe, audiences have already experienced it. Small theaters in Paris, Zurich, Prague. People walked in strangers and walked out changed. Gere says that when the lights came up, something subtle but real happened. People turned toward each other, smiled, nodded, as if they were remembering something ancient and obvious. No phones, no noise, just the quiet realization that, for an hour and a half, everyone had felt the same thing. Connection. One woman reportedly wept, saying she couldn't remember the last time she'd looked at another person without judgment. A man in Vienna said it was the first movie that made him want to apologize to the world. That's the power of this film. Not the production, not the celebrity attached to it, but the way it reminds people what it means to simply see one another. And in a world scrolling itself numb, that kind of moment feels almost revolutionary. The world has changed radically in the last year and a half, Richard Gere said quietly. We've fallen off a cliff. It wasn't hyperbole. It was observation. You could hear the weight of those words. Not the panic of a headline, but the calm recognition of someone who's been watching humanity lose its balance in slow motion. He's right. Look around. We scroll past wars like they're weather updates. We see outrage trending before breakfast and exhaustion by noon. We live in a world that confuses noise for truth, anger for strength, and attention for connection. And somewhere in that endless scroll, we forgot how to breathe. Gere calls Wisdom of Happiness a kind of corrective. Not a cure, not a miracle, but a small dose of medicine for the modern soul. A reminder that empathy isn't weakness. It's the only thing holding us together. Because while politicians argue and timelines refresh, the film asks one radical question. What if peace isn't something we wait for, but something we choose? Right now, in the middle of the chaos? In his interviews, Gere doesn't lecture. He doesn't point fingers. He simply observes, we've all kind of fallen off a cliff. And he's not talking about economics or politics. He's talking about something deeper. The emotional freefall of a world that can't seem to look up from its screen long enough to see another human being. The film lands differently because of that. It doesn't demand action, it invites awareness. Between the Dalai Lama's gentle humor and Gere's quiet reverence, there's an energy that feels like a reset. A pause button pressed in the middle of a storm. Wars still rage. The planet still burns. The media still spins stories faster than truth can catch up. But for 90 minutes, Wisdom of Happiness gives you permission to remember that beneath all of it, we're the same species, scared, searching, and still capable of kindness. Maybe that's why audiences leave the theater softer, quieter, different. Because somewhere between the laughter and the silence, the film whispers what the world seems to have forgotten: that healing begins when we stop shouting. Maybe this isn't just a movie. Maybe it's a reset button. The studio felt different that morning. No flashing chaos, no tense countdowns. Just laughter, warmth, and a kind of ease that television rarely captures anymore. Richard Gere sat across from the hosts, relaxed, hands folded, eyes soft. The conversation didn't feel rehearsed. It felt real. He joked about missed flights and delayed departures, teasing one of the hosts who almost left for Tucson mid-interview. The banter was playful, gentle, human, and for a few moments, everyone watching could feel what genuine connection looks like when no one's trying too hard. There was a lightness in the room, the kind that happens when someone's presence disarms cynicism. Gere wasn't there to sell a film. He was there to share it. Every sentence carried sincerity, not strategy. You could see the difference in his pauses, his laughter, his way of listening. The hosts leaned in, smiling in that unguarded way people do when they forget the cameras are on. It was contagious. That small, fleeting sense that not everything on television has to be loud to matter. For a moment, the heaviness of the outside world, the division, the doom-scrolling, the constant hum of anxiety, felt far away. The studio lights glowed softer. The laughter echoed longer, and in that bubble of calm, you could almost believe that peace wasn't just something in his movie. It was something he carried with him. But then, the conversation turned, quietly, painfully, to someone he once shared the screen with. And just like that, the room changed. The laughter softened, the air grew still, and one of the hosts, almost hesitantly, mentioned a name that carried the weight of an era: Diane Keaton. You could see it in Richard Gere's face before he even spoke. The warmth in his eyes turned to something quieter, something that only comes when memory meets loss. He smiled faintly, almost wistfully. "One of my early films," he said. "My second, actually, was with her." His voice dropped to that tone only grief knows. Not sadness, but gratitude that someone once existed in your story. He talked about those days. Two shy artists finding their footing in a brutal industry that rewards boldness but rarely kindness. They were both young, both nervous, both unsure of how to protect the tenderness that lived inside their work. So they protected each other. Through long shooting days, awkward scenes, and moments that demanded vulnerability, they found a rhythm. One built not on chemistry, but care. "She was shy," he said softly. "Skittish even. And I was too. We kind of took care of each other, getting through those tough scenes." He paused then, looking down, his hands folded, the weight of decades pressing between his words. The hosts said nothing. They didn't need to, because in that pause, you could feel it. The unspoken truth of losing someone who once made your world feel simpler. He looked back up and said what might be the most honest tribute anyone could give in Hollywood. "Anyone who's ever worked with her knows she's real." The studio fell silent. Not uncomfortable, not staged, just the kind of silence that only comes when everyone in the room is remembering someone at the same time. For a brief, delicate moment, Richard Gere wasn't the movie star or the activist or the calm voice of compassion. He was just a man, sitting under bright lights, missing a friend. And in that silence, the audience felt it too. The weight of memory, the fragility of time, and the quiet grace of gratitude that lingers after goodbye. Two stories, one of a monk, one of a movie star, and somehow Richard Gere stands quietly between them, On one side, the Dalai Lama, 90 years of peace distilled into laughter, wisdom, and the kind of serenity that can't be taught, only lived. On the other, Diane Keaton, decades of truth poured into every role, every awkward smile, every line delivered straight from the heart. Two lives that could not be more different, yet both devoted to the same thing: honesty. And maybe that's the thread that ties it all together. Truth in all its forms. Truth in art, truth in faith, truth in being fully human, even when the world tells you to perform. Richard Gere has spent his life navigating both realms: the shimmering illusion of Hollywood and the quiet discipline of spiritual practice. One teaches you to act, the other teaches you to be. And somewhere between the two, he found balance. He became a bridge between fame and faith, ego and empathy, illusion and insight, because fame fades, applause ends. Even beauty, the kind the camera worships, eventually slips into memory. But kindness, that survives. Authenticity, that echoes. And compassion, that's the one performance that never stops being relevant. That's what Wisdom of Happiness is really about. Not religion, not celebrity, not even philosophy, but the courage to be real in a world that profits from pretending. Maybe that's why this story lingers. Because whether you're a Hollywood icon, a morning show host, or just someone trying to make sense of the noise, the message is the same. Peace doesn't come from escaping the world. It comes from remembering who you are inside it. So the question isn't whether the film will change the world. It's whether it might change you. Would you watch a film that could change how you see the world? When the credits roll, the lights come up slowly. And for a moment, no one moves. Richard Gere has described it many times. The way a theater feels after Wisdom of Happiness ends. That quiet hum, that strange stillness. You can almost hear people breathing again, like they've just woken from a long, collective dream. He says you can see it in their faces. Something subtle, almost invisible. The way strangers start to look at each other differently. No words, just recognition. Like for an hour and a half, the walls between them had quietly fallen away. And maybe that's the real miracle of the film. Not that it celebrates peace, but that it creates it, even if only for a moment. Because maybe peace doesn't start with politics or headlines. Maybe it starts when we stop scrolling, stop shouting, and simply look at each other and remember, we're on the same side. That's what Richard Gere carries with him. That small flicker of hope that art, when it's honest, can still change how we feel about one another. That even in an age of cynicism, a story told from the heart can still make us gentler. So if this story moved you, share it. Because one film might just remind us how to be human again.